This presentation is on engaging English learners using drama-based pedagogy. My name is Sarah Garvey, and this presentation is the culmination of my work at the American College of Education's Department of Teaching and Learning in teaching English learners. I also have several years of experience in drama education. We're going to synthesize those two experiences in this presentation so that all teachers of English learners can develop some strategies in using drama-based pedagogy with their English learner students. This presentation is going to do a quick review of some of the needs of English learners. We're going to talk about some hallmarks of drama-based pedagogy, and then we'll get into the benefits of that drama-based pedagogy for our English learner students. We'll talk through a few potential challenges, and I'll also share some ideas for implementing that drama-based pedagogy in your ESL classroom. To start, let's review a few things we know about teaching English learners. What works with English learners? We know that English learners need culturally responsive teaching. These students are bringing a wealth of experiences and background knowledge from their home cultures that needs to be valued and utilized in their classroom. To that end, we need to ensure a supportive classroom environment. All students should feel comfortable to be who they are, to bring their cultures to the classroom with them, and to work with one another to engage in their learning. Learning should be student-centered and student-led for English learners to really benefit. We need to give them a voice in their education and allow them to thoughtfully engage in their own learning. Additionally, we know that English learners need context for their learning, that it's always going to be valuable to provide them with context-rich vocabulary and context-rich utilization of their language learning and of those four language skills: reading, speaking, listening, and writing. So as we talk about drama-based pedagogy, we want to focus on combining that drama-based pedagogy with the things we already know work for and benefit those English learners. Let's talk a little bit more about culturally responsive teaching. Culturally responsive teaching is the idea that it is valuable and important to incorporate students' home cultures and languages into the classroom, and that those cultures should be celebrated, valued, and utilized in the teaching of all students. We know that student knowledge in their first language can contribute to literacy in their second language, so we want to encourage use of that first language in the classroom to begin with. We also know that students' background knowledge and cultural knowledge helps them to create future knowledge, right, and solidify future learnings. So we want to make sure that we are embracing what they already know. To that end, teachers' knowledge of students' home languages and home experiences are also critical in helping create those context-rich learning opportunities. If you know what students are experiencing and how they're speaking at home, you can ensure that, for example, your assessments are using thoughtful, culturally responsive examples and vocabulary, and are asking questions that are at that level of comprehensible input that those students need. We want to make sure that we are connecting students' prior knowledge and cultural understanding to create those opportunities for meaningful growth. And as Hoffman says, the assimilationist teacher finds threats to assimilation in student culture, but the culturally responsive teacher finds opportunities. They see culture as a source of strength to build upon. Important to remember that students are who they are and that who they are is valuable. So we should always be looking to build on who they are rather than to change it or take away from it. Culturally responsive teaching is not possible without a supportive classroom environment. So English learners need to feel that when they use language, when they try, when they're learning, that they're going to be supported, they're not going to be ridiculed. Those students' social and emotional well-being is critical to their success. We know that. So in order to push them towards academic success, we must also support them as individuals. We know that students want teachers to be aware of their situations. They might not always want to talk about them, right? But they want you to know so that you're aware, so that you understand what they're bringing with them to the classroom. so that you as the teacher can use what you know about this student to create a more effective learning environment for them. We know that culturally responsive teaching leads to a safe and supportive environment, and reciprocally, that the supportive classroom environment allows for culturally responsive teaching. And all of that combines to allow students to contribute and communicate meaningfully with one another in the classroom. In terms of content and student instruction, we know that English learners want opportunities for choice and leadership in terms of what they learn and how they learn it. We know that we are looking for authentic ways for students to use language. So we should be integrating language into content instruction, and that should allow our students to produce meaningful contexts, examples, and a utilization of their language. We need to be at that level of comprehensible input so that they understand and they're being challenged in what they're learning, and that we're incorporating social interaction and those four language skills that we talked about earlier. And as Kitabi and Kitabi write, we know that for English learners, using language is key to learning it. So we want to provide as many of those opportunities as we can. Now let's take a look at teaching drama and see how we might make some of these connections. So quickly, a few characteristics of drama-based pedagogy. Student-centered active learning. It's a combination of collaborative and individual work. We know that some drama learning is going to utilize dramatic texts, some of it's going to be student written or devised, and some of it's going to be improvised, which means it's not actually going to be written at all. It's just going to be spoken. We know that in drama-based pedagogy, there are opportunities for design, performance, direction, lots of different roles that students can take on. Those performance opportunities are going to be focused on character, emotion, and communication of that text. And we know that drama-based pedagogy incorporates, again, those literacy skills: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Students are reading dramatic texts, they're writing their own scripts, they're speaking that dialogue, and they're listening, whether they're in the audience or whether they're a scene partner. That listening skill is critical. This quote from Noor is really meaningful as well, just saying that drama provides the means for connecting emotions with cognition. So it's enabling students to take risks and experience the connection between thought and action. Again, this goes back to that idea of context. Students can understand what the words mean, can really connect that thought and action, what I'm saying and what I'm doing. That's going to provide them with a context rich usage of that language. So let's move forward into the meat of the content here, which is using drama-based pedagogy for English learners. How can we combine what we know about what works for English learners and what we know to be powerful and impactful drama-based pedagogy? So first, we know that we want to engage our students. And we know that drama activities are engaging physically, they're engaging mentally, and they're engaging emotionally as well. As Kawasaki points out, that the engagement of the body literally on stage also contributes to total physical response, which we know is an effective method for teaching English learners. In terms of that mental emotional engagement, what's really valuable is that students can embody different characters when they're doing drama-based learning. They don't have to always be themselves. Sometimes it can be really challenging for English learners to kind of be in the spotlight and feel as if, everyone's watching them, waiting for them to sort of say the wrong thing. But if you're given that language and you are pretending to be someone else, you kind of have that layer of separation so that it's not your effective filter that matters. It's the characters, right? Which can really be meaningful difference for student participation. We know that dramatic stories can be connected to students' lives. So you can have students create scenes based on things that they have lived. And you can also find dramatic texts, culturally responsive texts that are going to pull from shared lived experiences. And that allows students, again, to have that authentic context for learning and to really have a rich learning experience. Students can learn In drama-based pedagogy, they can learn from performing and also from being in that audience. So again, they're growing their speaking and their listening skills just from acting out scenes or dramatizing a story. I also want to point out that drama-based activities can be an effective alternative method of linguistic evaluation. So if you give your student the opportunity to present in a little bit of a different way, you can see them, observe them in that method, that environment, and that's another way of evaluating that student. Drama also is going to grow the confidence and self-expression of these students. So, as we mentioned before, with those authentic learning opportunities, things that are based in their lives, these opportunities can help students gain perspective on their own lives, on conversations they're having or want to have, and on relationships. These texts and exploration, improvisation can allow them to work through personal ideas and experiences. They can grow their confidence in speaking scripted lines and can grow with improvisation and natural conversation. So you start with your scripted lines, then you grow forward to being able to improvise, and then you're able to have this kind of natural conversation because you sort of practiced it by using these dialogue based texts. It's really good for our interpersonal communication skills, right? In addition to that sort of self expression and communication, we know that the responsibility involved with dramatic activities can help students grow as individuals. So if you're doing a scene with three scene partners, you're working together, but you also have your individual responsibility to that scene and to that group. So it's really valuable kind of shared performance, shared responsibility there between those students. Additionally, that further ownership of their learning comes from those individual activities, right? You have to memorize, you have to provide character, you have to present and perform in front of a group. So it requires a lot of ownership on the part of the student, which can be really helpful in students sort of buying into their own learning and contributing to their classroom environment. Additionally, we know these activities can encourage social development. So we know that drama activities can build classroom community and increase confidence beyond the classroom. Again, we talked about moving from scripted to improv to natural, communication, interpersonal communication. So the activities you do in your classroom have implications beyond the classroom. Students can share in the joy and creativity of shared art making with their classmates. That is not to be understated. This is something that students don't get to do in a lot of their other classes. So if they have the opportunity to make something, to become something, to collaborate, that can be really, really powerful for these students for whom we know belonging is so critical. We know that the nature of dramatic activities, because it's a little different than what they normally do, is going to let them engage and communicate with their peers in new and different ways. If you're putting them in a group and saying you're the director and you are the designer and you are the actors, that is a totally new type of communication that those students need to do. Again, here we're letting them take on different roles, experience different relationships with their peers. What is it like when I'm the actor and my friend is the director, as opposed to when I'm the director and he's the actor? How does that feel? How do we communicate differently? How do we navigate that relationship? And that's all helping them to explore these potential real life scenarios, prepare for other conversations. If they're having trouble expressing themselves to their friends, they can do an improvisation scenario where they sort of practice that conversation and get that real experience and get ready for applying that to their life. It can be really powerful. And of course, beyond this sort of personal, social, um, internal development that drama based activities can have on students, we know they can actually help to increase literacy, fluency, and language use in our English learner students. So we know that oral and visual engagement with language can be a really great way to introduce those concepts so you don't have to get bogged down with text. You can start with sound and meaning, especially with younger students or students who are very new to the language. This can be really influential. Again, improvisation is providing us with an opportunity for developing that interpersonal vocabulary and interpersonal communication skills, which is a critical aspect of fluency. We know that students develop that interpersonal communication earlier than they develop that academic communication. So we can kickstart that with some of these dramatic activities and then tie it in to their academic learning as we continue. Additionally, we know that drama activities can be used for reading and writing. Again, you're working with an existing script. You can also create your own scripts that kind of allow you to expand on ideas, create characters to help express. These are all really valuable utilizations of those four language skills. Additionally, the variety of thought and engagement, and again, that relationship between thought and expression that drama activities requires, can increase students' comfort levels and linguistic flexibility along with their fluency and literacy. So we're putting them in such a variety of situations, asking them to communicate and contribute in those situations. It's really working their brain in a new way, getting them to think about, how do I express what I want to express? How does my expression lead to action, and vice versa? Again, on that expression idea, students might be more expressive when they're in character. So you may have students who are very quiet and who are hesitant to speak English, but when they speak their home language, they are expressive, they are louder, they are having more fun. Again, maybe putting that filter up, maybe letting them do that in character in English is going to start to introduce to them how they can be expressive in the English language as well, which is connecting back. We're seeing here that the academic growth connects back to the personal growth, right? They are so interconnected and they go back and forth with each other. So it's critical for us to support students in those kind of growth opportunities and to allow them to embrace new levels of expression, which then gets them excited about language learning and helps them engage when things become more academic, or when something maybe seems out of their reach, they're still excited and motivated to continue learning that language because they've seen how it can help them communicate. We can use those drama-based activities also directly to help us learn new academic vocabulary. We know that a little bit of physicalization goes a long way in teaching something new, and we can combine that kind of dramatic play activity to teach those new concepts. We can use dramatic texts to help students make connections between oral and written expression. So we can let them see you've got the words on the page, but you've also got the way that you say them, right? What does it mean if a character says something angrily and says the same thing happily? You can communicate two different things with the same words, right? So we're allowing them to create those connections between their oral language and the written language. And again, talking about whole language, we are allowing them to make meaning from this full text. They know this whole story, and yet they have this small piece of dialogue that they have to communicate. So it's flexing those muscles of using that full text and using the context to make meaning in that small thing that you are saying, and vice versa. Now, this all sounds great. It seems like it's going to support students' expression. It's going to be a wonderful way to engage with students, and that's true. But there will be some challenges, especially if you are just getting started in implementing drama-based activities in your classroom. There may be some difficulties you will encounter. So I wanted to point out a few of these things so that you can anticipate them and be ready to kind of overcome those challenges. One thing to think about is that you can really be thoughtful and intentional about the text that you choose. So, teachers should take care to choose meaningful, culturally responsive, and relevant texts that are going to allow for exploration of identity. And again, you can allow students to create these texts as well, but the more you can say you have taken the time and the energy to go look for culturally responsive texts for them that are going to support their individual cultures, that's a very meaningful gesture and allows them to have a really authentic exploration of their identity through that drama based pedagogy. Again, to have that culturally responsive classroom, you're going to need to build that supportive environment. And for drama based learning, the environment has to be really supportive, engendering trust, allowing students to make choices, take risks, because they're really going to be putting themselves out there when they're on stage, when they're making these choices in front of the classroom. To that end, teachers might also want to take on some of that risk. They might want to put themselves, what we call in role, and participate in some of that dramatic play with the students so that you can model that kind of communication, so that you can help students feel more comfortable and confident in making these choices and taking these risks on their own. So some teachers might find that a little bit intimidating, but I highly encourage you to get involved yourself so that your students can see what it's like. And just like with some of these teachers, some of the students may be hesitant to engage, and then this is maybe the largest challenge, right? We are asking them to be vulnerable, and it is going to be somewhat individualized. There is a little bit of a spotlight. So, again, talking to them about putting that character out there rather than feeling like they're putting themselves out there may help them. And starting small, giving them little opportunities to build up with their dramatic participation can really be helpful. Just want to reiterate what Lambert is saying here, that there might be an intense kind of connection between that energy you can get and between those your students' identities and their embodiments of characters. It can be really powerful and impactful for some students, and can be really challenging for them as well if we're asking them to sort of push boundaries, explore new ways of communicating. So we want to be careful and thoughtful and supportive along the way. So now that we understand how this all connects, how beneficial it can be to use drama based pedagogy with our English learners, I want to give you a couple practical examples of things you might think about if you're sitting here wondering, well, how do I start? So, one of the simplest things we can do is start to incorporate sort of physicalization as we're learning new material or reinforcing concepts. We can use gestures, dances, body shapes, and characterization to kind of physicalize new learning. So, a couple examples, we can take a new vocabulary word, pair it with a gesture, engaging that total physical response and increasing the likelihood of memorization. So, if you're teaching your students about a chrysalis, you can have them act that out. What does that look like? How can they move their body? And that's going to help them remember that word. It's going to give them something else to hang on to. You can do an activity to embody an ecosystem. So you have some students who pretend to be deer and some students who pretend to be resources, and you set them across the room from one another. Each deer has to run across the room and find a resource to stay alive. If they run out of resources, they're going to, die, do that dramatically or what have you. They're going to come back as a resource. It's a great way for students to kind of learn about life cycle, to learn about the challenges of the ecosystem. What happens when the deer can't find that resource, right? So again, that's physicalizing. It's kind of a little bit of a game. It's pretty fun, but it's still rooted in that learning. You could create a human timeline to represent historical events. So you're learning about a particular time in history. You can have your students pick a character or a real person from that time period, or embody a historical event. What's the catchphrase, that helps us learn about this historical event? You can kind of stand up in your classroom and line up as this sort of person timeline. Those are some examples of how we can sort of physicalize new learning. We can also dramatize stories as we read. So if we're trying to teach particularly about character or plot, you can do this really well with dramatizing the reading rather than just having students listen. So again, if we're dramatizing, then we are engaging with speaking and listening and reading, and not just that listening, that passive listening. So maybe there's a repeated sort of theme or line in a story. You can have your students memorize these kind of key phrases, and you can kind of point to them, have them repeat it anytime it comes up in the story to kind of get them actively engaged in the reading. You can also use acting and dramatization to have them make determinations about character. So maybe there's a scene that you can have a couple of students act out and have them try it a couple of different ways until they land on what the truest interpretation of that character moment is, so they can come to the realization of what was most accurate when I was reading it as if it were mean. So that's telling me that maybe this character is mean or upset in this scene, right? You can also use drama in interdisciplinary lessons. So maybe you want to find a text that pairs with a period in history and use the study of the play to pair with your history study. So, for example, you could study The Outsiders, which takes place during the civil rights movement, although it does not reference that. So, that's interesting enough to sort of talk about. You can explore perspective and character through the play, but you can also create radio broadcasts, journal entries. They can act out scenes. They can create, new characters. What would it be like if there were a Black character in The Outsiders whose family was being impacted by the civil rights movement, right? That kind of improvisation can really help connect those two subjects and enhance the learning there for students. For example, you could read The Giving Tree, and then you can ask students to dramatize that. So they can choose to be the tree or the boy, and maybe an example from their own life that have them share what's your giving tree give to the people in your life? And if you're the boy, what do you take from the giving trees of people or places that you have in your life? Again, it's deepening those connections and allowing them to bring a little bit of themselves into the classroom. Speaking of bringing themselves into the classroom, you can explore the cultures that are in your students in your classroom through dramatic texts, and celebrate those other cultures. So one thing you can do that's really easy is allow students to contribute multicultural texts to your classroom library. So these could be dramatic texts that you could read directly from and act out, or they could be stories and books that you could then dramatize. You could also work to dramatize multicultural holidays and greetings and things like that to get students to engage with their own cultures and with each other's cultures during your class. So, those are just a few simple ideas to get you thinking, get you started on how can I make learning more active for my students? How can I use dramatization, drama based pedagogy to get students engaged in and excited about their learning? I have a couple of quotes that I want to wrap up with here. So, this one is drama makes learning more memorable and retrievable because it draws on those higher order skills of creativity, critical thinking, and social and emotional learning. So, that's sort of what we've just been speaking about. It's touching on all of these different skills. Students are growing in innumerable ways through their study that's based in drama. Cooperative learning associated with drama based pedagogy combines individual responsibility with working as part of a group and can benefit students socially, in terms of soft skills, and academically. So we know now that teaching is not just subject matter. We are teaching students to be individuals, right? So those social skills, those soft skills are so critical, along with the academic skills that can come from the cooperative learning and drama based pedagogy. Drama enables learners to perceive, think, act, and interact during the learning process instead of being passive receivers of knowledge. That is a life skill of engaging with your learning and being an active learner, right? And we want our students to create their own meaning from their learning. We want them to be engaged and active. And drama based pedagogy can really help them do that. So my final thought here is to center the student, support the environment, encourage expression, and learning will thrive. So the drama-based pedagogy is one tool in your tool belt as a teacher of English learners. It's something that can introduce new ways of learning, new ways of thinking, new ways of engaging. It's not something you're going to do for every activity, but it is something that can really benefit in a lot of different ways. And I wanted to kind of introduce this if it's not something that you are familiar with from your education training. But these concepts here, centering the student, supporting the environment, and encouraging expression, those should apply no matter if you're using drama based pedagogy or not. But what's beautiful about drama based pedagogy is that these things are happening naturally just by utilizing those tools. And that is what I hope for you, that you and your students will see learning thrive as a result of these techniques.